when technology changes, we kind of change, and sometimes like creatures and stuff that otherwise would do other things start to adapt to new technology. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about Gremlins. Like not the fun movie Gremlin. Gremlin, basically saboteurs of technology, most specifically aviation technology, right? So, there's something on the wing, there's something out there. Yeah. So,
Which is funny, very briefly, when I was first looking into this, I always compared gremlins to goblins. Like I always thought they were like synonymous. And it wasn't until I actually like dove into this a little bit, I was like, oh no, gremlin is like real with tech. Like that's the history behind it. They are hardcore associated with tech. And I was just, well, interesting. So,
yeah, and a lot of it is like very much like aviation tech. And it's similar to like your thought, like there might be some kind of link up to goblins, but it's like they're another version of a trickster. The like first written account is like, I think it's like 23, and it's like basically a quarterly journal of military history or something like that, and talking about a lot of this is like with the Royal Air Force, and this guy is talking about how he's flying his plane, and there's like these little creatures or little people jump out of a bottle of beer and they start sabotaging the mechanics of his plane. Right?
In other news, it was perfectly normal for the bottle of beer to have been there. But,
well, you don't want to drink the water, depending where you're at. I mean, so there's but there does seem to be although a lot of it does center around just before World War II, obviously this is the heightened version of aircraft. There is some things where it may have also originated early in World War I and II, like the first type of use of aircraft for things, but it really gets its prominence and it's it starts in that 20s and 30s in Malta and over other places where the Royal Air Force is right before the war happens, so it's so there's this kind of different, and the gremlins start to they can kind of appear as little kind of creatures, they're or more like people type things, but similar to other fae folks. It's there's kind of different, there might even be different color versions of them that have different taxonomies, and there's this idea that they usually have a slightly longer nose, a little they're kind of wispy, and they or sometimes they're invisible. You don't see them, or you just see traces of them, like wires that have been chewed through, or things that have happened. But it's and which is kind of funny. There's ones that they get inside the gas tanks, they drink all the gas from the plane, or they jam up the guns during a fight. They jam up the landing gear. They have they've packed a spare map for navigation and the navigation map is gone, or there's a broken dials and things and there'll be a little wrench left behind, or something like these. So there's this element too where they're kind of similar to I guess other kind of house fae spirits, but they're they don't like aircrafts apparently. It's almost like they don't like they have a problem with them. And sometimes there was instances where they were they're good, where they might sew something up or help out the ground crew in some way. But when they're doing something good, it's to the detriment of another thing. They unjammed a gun so they can shoot another plane down or something. They ride along in the slipstream of the aircraft, sort of and grab onto planes and things, and sometimes they live inside of the planes, in different areas, tearing things apart and disassembling stuff. But they are they're mechanical based, and it's kind of interesting. This guy, he was about to land his plane and he saw a creature, and it said it was gray with bug eyes, right? And then another creature that was almost an owl type creature appeared on the front of the plane, the nose of the plane, and started attacking it. The crew did some kind of maneuver and shook them off, but it was it kind of sounded like this kind of like red eye, bug eye thing. It had very like Mothman tendencies
Yeah.
to it, you know. So I thought
Well,
that was kind of
and it makes me
interesting.
think of, I'll just say aliens, because I'm talking about creatures from space or from the future that are different enough from us that, that here they are. And like you'll get these different, so it starts out, you'll get like these different descriptions of aliens. And then gradually there are like more and more descriptions of them. So like most people now, 2026 for historical purposes, have a pretty big familiarity with like the alien gray, right? It's like the gray, bald, skinny alien about human height, probably smaller with big eyes. Now we've also got people talk about like reptilians and then these other ones that just kind of look like humans that are all blonde and stuff. So there's all kinds of different and not to disparage people's accounts. Yeah, I'm just, it's funny because like you get like these descriptions of like gremlins that have like suction cup feet. And it's like, well, that doesn't sound like a creature. Like, but it's also like, oh,
Sometimes they're also wearing like little like flight goggles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like how did they get like they grab them
like,
up or something? Yeah,
right? Like, what's the supply chain on that? You know, did they like refine petroleum into plastics and things? I don't know.
So back to our sort of like our leprechaun conversation.
That's what I was just thinking. Yeah.
It's like they have like these like miniature version of these different things. They're kind of like crafts people, but the gremlins are sort of like they're crafty, like they know mechanical stuff, but they're kind of like against it. Like they don't like this, and particularly like it seems like it's broken out during this like start of this like fairly new technology really taking off, right? Like so like things are going like wrong. But then it's also like during like a heavy wartime that it's like these things are happening, like that they're jamming them up. They're like there's like some kind of like thing. But when you're talking about aliens, I was really trying to I'll go back a little bit to like some of the earlier stuff. I was really trying to find like there's this thing where it's like after like probably like about the 50s and stuff, this stuff starts falling out of fashion, like the rise of like the like jet aerospace stuff, like that kind of and like the like essentially like NASA programs, things like that, like and it's like, well, then gremlins start falling away. But then what do we have that's a rise of? We have like, oh, well, we see like lights, we see aliens, we start seeing all these things. The jet pilot might have an encounter with like UAP or whatever it is, and then like, oh, all of my instruments go crazy and I don't know what's going on, and like everything's goes awry, and it's like, well, maybe it's not that like the gremlins were aliens, maybe aliens are gremlins. Like
Yeah, well,
maybe you have like it's like because they seem to have the similar phenomenon. Like sometimes you can't see them, sometimes they appear weird, sometimes they set you off course, they mess up your plane, like they like an encounter with one can like it's like you'll be in a dogfight with another jet. I mean, even in some of the more recent things, and then all of a sudden something appears and throws people off course and gets everything messed up, and they're like, well, alien, because I guess like aliens sound more, and then I think you'll like this one, but like aliens sound more like scientific. It's like it's the rational like fae folk, right? They must exist from another place and another thing with advanced technology, and it's like, well, what about like if it's all these just something else, just like weird. It's not as just like, oh yeah, sure, like it's like because I feel like aliens is like as much as it's like we don't have proof, we don't know a thing, but it's like, but it seems like, well, there must be like this rational explanation behind this thing we don't get, and it's like, but before it was like, no, it's probably weird little goblin like things that are ripping everything apart. I don't know, which is kind of a little more fun, I think.
So it's funny because this reminds me of a chair's falling apart here. Donate to our podcast so I can have a chair that doesn't fall apart. It makes me think of okay, so this is like God, there are like 4 tangents I can go on. Which one am I going to go on? Who knows? I'm going to talk actually about like is it so when you have the leprechaun shows up and it's like it shows up but it's not quite right. Like something's
Right.
kind of like off about it. And you might think of like, well, what if we were trying to, I don't know, like you're trying to impersonate something. You don't know all like the little details on it for like why these things are around. Like you might not understand um, why what a belt is for or something. You know, it's just a thing that's there. So you make it look like something, but it doesn't make sense. Or like we talked about like the airship type thing, like the oh yeah, well we gotta show up in these boats in the sky. You know, like it doesn't make sense, but it's kind of like but we're trying to do it in a way that kind of makes sense to these creatures. You know, so that idea is like there's a thing that's appearing that's varying its appearance in order to work for us. You know, then the other idea is like there's a thing there and something's happening to us that has us perceive it and we make our best approximation of it or whatever, and that's why it shows up like that, you know, and looking like people and stuff. um and then of course the oh well, there's nothing there. You're just blaming mechanical problems on supernatural things. They're not real, you know. And so when it comes to like quote unquote aliens, like space aliens, you know, we've got this idea that yeah, like this is more respectable because we know boats don't float in the sky, and we know that leprechauns and things aren't real, but yeah, like this thing
These
in
are
a
the
metal craft that comes from some other planet like ours, but then like then that starts to fall
completely
apart,
defies the
right?
laws of physics.
Yeah,
Like,
well,
right?
that's the thing. Like, it starts to fall apart, and it's like, okay, well, this isn't a scientific explanation either. This is just a ghost story with more science-y sounding things. You
Yeah.
know? But what the heck is it really? You know? And now I'm of the belief this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that's listened to me babble on before of one of these things. I'm of the belief that these things are all ghosts, basically. You know, that they're not crafts from another planet, or maybe there aren't other planets. Maybe this isn't real. Maybe this is a simulation. Yeah,
Well,
but
like, that we can't go off on. That's
no, we almost wound up there last time.
yeah. We got
You know,
we got reel that one in for the
yeah, so
simulation episode.
all right, but so let's say though that you know, there are there are planets. There are planets. I believe in them. But so yeah, like you've got this ghosty kind of thing. I'll talk about the other tangent I didn't know if I was going to get on or not. Bigfoot. Oh yeah, Bigfoot. Imagine that getting brought up. But Bigfoot shows up on battlefields. Now, if you go with the explanation that Bigfoot is some kind of a monkey bear thing, right? That's just living out there with its own food supply we don't know about, and plenty. You know, yeah, it's an animal that lives in the woods that we haven't chopped down yet. Okay, but why would it be on a battlefield? There's only one primate stupid enough to run after dangerous sounding sounds or towards fire or other things that can kill you, and they also have podcasts. So, why would Bigfoot be on the battlefield? Well, what else shows up on battlefields? Ghosts. What else shows up on battlefields? Aliens. In fact, listeners who stayed on, thank you. And check out, there's a channel called Wartime Stories that's all just about weird stuff that happens in battle and in wartime and in war places. And they range from the stuff we're talking about today, gremlins, very much a wartime phenomenon, to giants. I don't know if we'll ever talk about giants on here or not. But if we do, we'll be referencing some wartime stories because it's, yeah.
So the one thing that's really interesting, and this goes back to when we talked about time slips and the whole idea of people talking about these things when they have nothing to gain from it. So the idea, you know, we're talking about the Royal British Army, I think it was, or the Royal British
Air
Air
Force.
Yeah. Obviously flying Air Force, obviously.
Yeah. No, that's a
Unless they're not flying cause gremlins.
And I think about, you know, modern day accounts of pilots talking about seeing saucers or whatever, and it's like they have nothing to gain from this. You know, they only have stuff to lose. And it's interesting that on one hand it's like, oh, it's the logical, fully grounded, unimaginative part of me is like, it's all BS. But then the other part of me is like, then why would they all talk about this? Why would they risk? And in some cases, you've had people like lose their pensions, their jobs, they lose everything because they talk about stuff like this. So just talking about that, it reminds me of that conversation we had during the time slips episode.
Yeah, and there might be like an element too, like I mean, I guess if you want to get out of the fun, like fantastical part of it and into like the mundane, like the like psychological nature of like this is crazy. Like airplanes have basically just been invented for the most part. Like I mean, figure the time between like the 20s and 30s, the start of seeing these things up and then into like the Battle of Britain and that kind of stuff, like the and the Blitz and all. It's like it's kind of there's not a lot of time for that technology. That technology develops like really rapidly from like the Wright brothers like basically built a glider with a lawnmower engine, so, like it's like this kind of thing, and you're navigating this thing like kind of pulleys and cables and a throttle, like that, and it's like, and gearing and chains and stuff. And there's nothing to now. You're flying these things like very fast in cockpits with guns, shooting at each other like over the top of the city. It's like it goes to this kind of like jump in thing. So I mean, like it's a technology jump that's pretty quick, and it's also like coping with something that's like, yeah, like we didn't have these things, 30 years ago, and now we're literally using them to fight wars in the air. Like it's like I mean, so there probably is like something like what's going on, like it's like like so I mean so actually like something like yeah, well it's not my fault. Gremlins got this thing, or like I did not tighten that bolt like because I haven't slept and I'm trying to work on all these planes. It was probably Gremlins, or just the fact of like. We're talking about when you're exhausted and at your point of stress and you start seeing weird things, like it's like like probably do see things. So there could be that, but like or maybe the exhausted point of stress, maybe there are just weird things that you now can see. I don't know. But take whichever explanation you feel like having. Like we kind of talked about, and it's weird. Like funny enough, when I was looking at this research a little more, and I was thinking about the first story of like that's written down about them jumping out of a bottle of beer, or talk about the mushrooms, like these little mischievous guys, and now they get in everything, and now they're just gonna like wreck stuff. But it's like because I don't know, maybe they don't like this technology very much or something like that. It's the other equivalents like that are a little like earlier. There seems to be like a variation of like kobolds, which are not like what we think of as D&D kobolds, like the little lizard guys, but they're like the traditional kobolds. They're almost like they're kind of like a little, almost like think like they look sort of like the house elf from like Harry Potter or something. They have the big ears, they're very small, they're dressed in little like tunics though, and they like have like the like kind of like not quite a gnome, but like that kind of thing. And they some of them are in mines, some of them like are in houses, but then there's like stories, it's like that would get on ships, and they would sometimes like do stuff like if they were good, they'd like help out and fix things on the ship, but they'd stow away on boats, and sometimes they would wreck stuff on the boat. It's like so, and like, and then there's like another version that's like I'm gonna here we go mess up the pronunciation, the Klabbertman. Like it's like I guess it's that's more of like, I mean kobolds are Germanic already, but this is like another kind of more specifically boat version of the kobold, not just a stowaway kobold, but one that now lives on boats, and they sometimes will warn people if there's danger, or they would they'd fix things that were in disrepair, like on the ship, similar to like a brownie or something, like that kind of idea. But then there's like other ones that will like, if the ship is already in disrepair, they'll like mess it up more because they don't like they kind of feel like you shouldn't have let the ship go to disrepair. So there's kind of like this kind of like weird push and pull. So like, and that's like, I feel like that's the most like equivalent I can find to like, well, it's like sailing is kind of new tech. It's like same thing. You see these things when you're out at sea. They start messing with the ship, like messing with the ropes, messing with the sails, or sometimes they're good and they fix things, and so it's kind of similar to the gremlin, but maybe not as like I feel like maybe not quite as mischievous though. Like gremlins definitely seem like they're more like into like sabotage. So, yeah.
So I didn't have the foresight to think about this, but how far back does something like a gremlin go? Like you talked about ships, you talked about like a thing that messes with ship navigation or whatever. How
Yeah.
far back does it go? Do we have things messing with catapults, screwing with pulley systems?
Yeah,
How far back does this go?
I couldn't find anything like that. I mean, that would probably be like the closest thing I could think of would probably be like that, like something like, you know, a brownie or something that's like it lives in a house or on a farm and it does some chores, but then if you mess with it, it wrecks stuff. But it's not like, but I don't know of anything that's like particularly like messing with like say like construction technology or like, you know, battle technology. So I was just thinking more of like, yeah. So, but if anyone else knows anything, yeah.
You know where to put it.
Mhm.
Comments.
I was hunting down a little reference, and I think it's kind of funny. It's this sabotage by Gremlin here. I was looking up a reference that I had encountered in a clearly AI assembled video on Gremlins, and one of the things they said was that some people thought what Gremlins really were, the plain Gremlins, were chinchillas that had climbed into the plains in the Andes and chewed through the wires, which might make a little bit of sense. Chinchillas have a diet high in wires, and so it would. But the Andes, I mean, were we running many things out of South America in or
I mean, it might just be like that one instance. I mean, there is like wire things, but there's another story I'd read that was basically like wires were like looked like they were severed, not chewed
right,
through.
right.
It's like other ones where it's like bolts are literally like loosened up. Like it's like I don't think chinchillas are specifically or like on the gun in flight. It's like up on a gun, like messing with your your gun when you're in the middle.
I don't
of
believe the
battle.
chinchilla explanation, but it does lead to a funny little thing. So I was looking at the chinchilla explanation, and it turns out that probably where AI got this chinchilla reference is that people will refer to the Mogwai in the Gremlins movie as being like a chinchilla or refer to them as chinchillas.
Well, that brings us to like maybe two things. One, I had twice in the course of a week uh, when I was living in Baltimore had rats chew through the wire of my car. I don't think that counts as gremlins, but they were definitely mischievous and big. Like, so it's like the ones that I like caught glimpses of. Rats apparently do like electrical wiring. I think squirrels also like it as well. So there is some kind of precedence for animals chewing through wires. Second, maybe like things like AI hallucinations and things like that are kind of a sort of modern-ish version of the gremlin in the computer age.
Yeah.
Like it's like, well, here's this new technology and it's kind of going off the rails. It's like it's conflating things that aren't true with things that like are half truths or subreddits or something.
Yeah.
And then just going like, you're really smart. Here. It's
Like, and is it there because of their sense of humor in that regard?
Yeah.
It's like
They wanna
like do
throw
they
you
do they
off
mess
the
with our
case.
planes because we make really funny expressions when we're freaking out or something? Is it just a twisted kind of humor of these otherworldly things? And also talk about the Gremlins movie for just a second here. And
We're not gonna talk about the Twilight Zone for.
we're going to talk about that too. But one thing I thought was funny, I was talking to Sharon about this earlier. The notion of you would go into a store in Chinatown, buy a weird animal that you don't know what it is, and give it to your kid. And that seems like a good idea. And I was like, why would somebody do that? And I was talking to Sharon about this morning, and I was like, because it was the 80s. And that just, that's just how the 80s were.
Or whenever Gremlins was supposed to take place. Well, but the funny thing is, like, here, I'll give
like a weird
this is my like, it'll be my hot take on a very, very old movie. It's the creatures are not gremlins in
No.
Gremlins, the movie. They're not, no, not like, even in the context of the movie. The term comes from because the one guy, he has like, he's an old World War II vet, and he talks about like things getting into the machinery, and it's like, he has this old, this old truck, that's like using for like a snowplow, and it's like he's like, they don't build things like back in the day, and it's like, and then he goes on like a story tangent about how things used to get into stuff and break things up. No gremlins, and then when he sees the like that's so it's like so in the movie it's just like this other creature, but like and they do things, but they're not actually gremlins. Gremlins is just like the thing that he's talking about as like a sort of, I guess, like a equivalent thing. So it's not they're not actually like they're not the like they're like even in the movie world they're something else. They're like they're mogwai, right? That's what they're a different creature. And and I think buying first of all, the guy in the story, the kid knows that the grandson of the guy of the very creepy old guy running the shop is the one that sells him the thing on the side. Like he sneaks it out to make some extra money, and it's like, but then there's like, I think it was just like, oh, I'm buying an exotic pet from a place I've never heard of. It's like, it's like my kid will love it, and it's got creepy rules that go along with it. So it's like that makes sense.
Like this doesn't sound like a dog.
Yeah, I mean, like it's like there's not too tangent, but there's like one of my favorite Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episodes, which one does have something on the wing like reference, but it's like Gremlin on a school bus. But it's the one where he buys him like basically like the cursed Krusty doll from the store, and he goes into the store, and it's like that's the only place he can go to buy his kid like a store that sells cursed objects, and it's kind of like, like, why would you do that? bad parenting.
Bad parenting from today's perspective, but totally normal at the time.
Whenever I think about that movie, I think about those days when we would watch Gremlins, and we would constantly rewind the part when the lady flies out the window of the chair. She's coming back in, she's going back out. She's coming back in, she's going back out.
Talking about small creatures with twisted senses of humor, children. They fit that description.
That lady was pretty evil, though.
Yeah, she was.
She tried to kill the dog, like, Wicked Witch style.
Well, and that's the thing. There was a sense in which it was sort of like a justified act of violence in our mind, But oh no, no comment, except for those of the viewers in our comments below, or listeners wherever you are.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this concept of demonic technology. And the idea is that we get technology from demons. We get them from sometimes invisible things that we make deals with in order to get some kind of technological advantage. And that kind of story, I mean, it's an old tale, But if you actually look at things like the technology of metallurgy, of making weapons or something like that. But then, well, what's the downside of that? Well, now you're involved in this war world, or you get the technology of a certain type of the technology of building cities and walls and things to protect your city. But what do you lose? Everything outside the wall, right? Like when you start living in these towns and cities, now you're separated from the forests and things, and you lose something in that, And so there's this idea that goes along with this cursed technology or demonic technology, that you get something, but you also, along with it, you get the short end of the stick or the other side of the blade or the whatever metaphor you want to extend to it. And so when you start getting, so you've got, now you've got planes, and it's like the first time we're in this little realm, and something starts showing up, that that's a exposes something about this, it related to this technology. Here are these creatures now in this realm we've not been able to access before, the sky, and they're messing with us, And so there's a sense in which, like, well, is it because there's a tainted technology? Is it because by accessing this thing, we also wind up, we didn't read the fine print, like, in the terms and conditions, number 77, we'll make it 72. Number 72, you get demons, or user of this technology agrees not to be bothered by the tiny creatures, taking apart your technology. Does not hold the inventor of this technology responsible or whatever, and it's. So it's kind of funny because we get in these realms, where we've got this new tech or this new realm we're in, and then we get this stuff like that, aliens.
It almost reminds me, going along with that, you hear these stories where you have these nuclear missile silos, and for whatever reason, you see people report of, aircraft or flying something in the sky, and all of a sudden the silo goes offline and it can't do anything.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of that, where it's like, it's in theory, if you subscribe to the idea of gremlins and aliens, it's like these things are keeping us from doing certain things. They don't want us in the sky. Gremlins are like, no, the sky is not for you. You're staying down here, and same thing with like this concept of aliens too, where it's like, no, nuclear missiles. No, those are not for you either. You're going to kill yourselves.
Yeah.
That's no, sorry, no.
Or they thought it was funny to see everybody running around trying to figure out what happened. And it's just like, they're all just like, yeah, look at that guy again. Wait till we go to the other side, go over Russia.
Yeah, I think of the, like, with the...
It would have been the Soviet Union at the time.
With the ship, like the like different, like creatures, like hopping ships, right? Like that kind of makes like, at least in like in that kind of folklore sense, right? It's like, well, you kind of, what's a ship? It's like, it's made, I mean, especially like bigger ship, like they have like large ships. It's like they're the forest, right? You have to, like, everything's made from very big trees, and these creatures are kind of like, generally forests, like they end up on farms, but they're from this kind of forest fey world that's like, and then it's like, well, you like took the forest, I'm going to jump on the ship then, because you basically deforested, like, it's like, so there's kind of like this kind of weird, like that, but like the Gremlins thing is like completely, like, feels like a little different, just because it's like the tech is it's all like metal and weird things, and like bolts and wiring, and it's all this stuff that's like not that's just like, and they're like, but they're like mechanically knowledgeable enough to, like, I know if I undo these things or I mess with this stuff, it's gonna like screw this up. Like, so it's like kind of like they it's like almost like they they kind of know mechanical things to some degree, in order to do. It's not just random like chaos, like just tearing through stuff or whatever. It's like, it has a more
I don't know,
precision.
or they have no knowledge of it and they're just curious, like, oh, what happens if I turn this? This
Turns out it doesn't take much to break a plane.
This wire's in my way. I'm just going to cut it so I can walk through here nice and easily.
Yeah. That's true. That could be
Oh man.
Oh man.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, it's funny, and I mean, going back to the whole, like, the AI hallucinations and things like that, and the idea of the demonic technology. Now here we are with this stuff we don't quite understand. We're messing around. We think we understand it. And you see, that's kind of a thing, like, I mean, oftentimes, so we'll create these technologies based on models of the world And then it turns out that those models aren't correct, but the technology worked. And so it's like, are we like, how much of these things have to do with like our mistaken concept of just how the world works in general? And I mean, going back, I like what you said about the chopping down the woods to make the boats. I mean, because like, where the heck do we get all this stuff? You know, like right now we're talking about like processor chips or you know screens of various type plasma screens or various types of screens that are touch responsive and things. And you have to like dig into the earth pretty decently to get these things. I'll save my tangent about capitalism, but we have to do these things, and oh no, actually I am gonna no, I won't. It's gonna talk about debt as a demonic technology, but what are you stirring up when you're digging into these things? I mean, look at Lord of the Rings and like the dwarves and what did they stir up? Digging down in these depths.
Well, I'll add into that real quick. So there's this well documented. We're gonna go with that because this is the internet. We can say whatever we want. There's this well documented phenomenon where when people do renovations on their home, like large scale renovations, a lot of times it kicks up paranormal activity. Yeah. And the idea is, is it people's spirits that used to live there? It's like, why are you messing with my home? That kind of a thing. But right. It is not uncommon for this sort of thing to happen when people start doing massive renovations.
Yeah.
So it's about the idea of like deforestation to build boats. Kind of a similar idea. Like we're taking away, hey, you guys are hanging out here. Not anymore. We're taking this to build our boats.
Yeah. Or I guess strip mining the earth to build technology.
The aliens like, you want metal? How about these saucers? We'll show you some metal.
Yeah. It's really strange. It's I mean, obviously we're talking about it,
Yeah, that's the point of the whole point of the podcast. That's really
So I mean, when you've got let's take it in a strange direction.
So before this is all just like normal stuff. Like
it was totally normal when we were talking about planes.
Yeah.
But strange would be if people told you they weren't real. Why? Okay, let's suppose now. Let's play this game. Gremlins are real, but the government, specifically the war governments, governments that want you flying planes and things, are going to say that these things are not real, right? Why? And I mean, I already gave away the story. I mean, I was trying to set that up better. Because they want you to fly, right? They want you to go up there and, you're like, oh, this guy's seeing gremlins, just give him one of those, things to make them not see them anymore, inject the internet into his neck so he can't see them anymore. What if they're there? What if they're there and there's just this cover-up story? I mean, I'm saying gremlins.
Is the TSA just a screen, really just a screen for gremlins? That's why.
Yeah, or like people have seen them. Do you have anything to declare? Do you bring anything? Do you see anything weird on your flight? Like I haven't been on a flight in a while. Not because I'm banned from them. I don't know. I haven't given it a shot in a while. But maybe that's why. Because tell me, do they ask you these questions? When you're getting on a flight,
have you seen
anymore?
Have you seen this gremlin?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the whole thing isn't. I mean, people are talking about again, beginning of 2026. We're in what was at that time referred to as the United States.
Yeah.
And they're checking your social media when you come in from outside the borders.
Well, they're
maybe it's because they want to see
flights.
if you're talking about gremlins. Maybe they want to see if you've seen anything weird. All right, enough of that. Let's someone else talk.
Well, I'm gonna stay on this. So if they want to keep that under wraps, then then the why. Why are my mind jumps to they're using them. They're using them somehow. What are they doing? Are they using them to sabotage other countries' planes? Are they using them to sabotage other network infrastructure or utility infrastructure? Are they using them to have massive parties and throw down during off hours?
I'm afraid it's much more disappointing than any of those. I figured it out already. To get larger market share. That's it. That's it.
Mic drop.
It's just to get larger market share so they can have more money.
We need to like
So
actually
boring.
like get like some kind of like surveillance gremlin, like they like overload, server networks that are like
So
pulling cables and stuff.
At a point during, I think this was during World War II, pilots started doing things to bribe the gremlins. They started like leaving offerings and things like that. What you start having now is this weird kind of magic. Magic, you can't get rid of it.
Well, it's the same thing as like that's what you do with
'cause
like
it's awesome.
with health spirits, like or health
Yeah.
house pet. You leave a little like piece of bread or some kind of something for them, or like milk or whatever it is, like so
Yeah.
to keep them happy, if they're gonna be in your house doing stuff, because then if they get mad, then they'll wreck.
Gremlins, so after they became more popular among pilots, popular in the sense that people believed in them a little bit more, or where the superstition was on the increase, if you call it superstition, other than just being aware of the truth. And the superstition was on the increase, and the actual military education started to take advantage of these gremlins, and it was like, oh, well, there's this type of gremlin that shows up if you haven't checked your, gone through your protocols to make sure your plane's running right, and so it became this thing where it's like, oh no, well, this is what they really are. It's if you haven't done things right. But that harkens back to the idea of like brownies specifically are the house entity that wants your kitchen clean. And it wants you to make sure your kitchen's clean too. And if you don't keep it clean, it's going to really, it's like, oh, you thought it was trashed before? I'll show you trashed. There's that's that dad warning, I'll give you something to cry about, or, I'll give you a dirty kitchen, but
You've got time to lean, you've got time to clean.
Well done. Nice reference.
And so there's this notion, particularly from people later in history, of looking back and being like, it wasn't a brownie. They had a mouse. Do you think they hadn't known that they had mice? Like, I mean, the mice were just a part of it. This was something different.
Maybe the brownie unleashed the mice in the house.
It's like anthropologists being like, oh, they don't even know. Bigfoot isn't real. It's just a monkey. It's like, you think they didn't know that there were monkeys? I mean, like, psh, anthropologists. But this is not talking about contemporary anthropologists. Nothing against you all. Actually, you guys are starting to be a little more open-minded. But that kind of idea of, it's like you're not doing your job, and so something comes up and trashes the place. But I don't think that's it. I think that's part of the cover-up. I think that's the actually like the notion of calling everything sorry everybody, calling everything a conspiracy theory to discredit it. Some of them should be discredited. And sometimes that's the way of discrediting them, is just by calling it a conspiracy theory, because the idea was, oh yeah, it's people working together this time. Well, actually, yeah, like that actually happens a lot. People work together to do something that is in the interest of that group, But the idea that,
are you saying they conspire? Is that what you're trying to say?
yeah, right. Which means
I have a theory about that.
it means to breathe together. By the way, that's where the etymology of conspiracy, to breathe together. But the idea that, hey, we can make these people look crazy. We'll say what these things really are these scientifically respectable explanations, to discredit these people that are saying they see this bluey furry thing on the wing of the plane. So that's one end of it. The same thing happens with the alien world. oh, well, we're going to tell all these people working on this secret military technology that it's actually stuff we've reverse engineered from aliens, so that then when they go out there and spill the beans about it, they're going to look crazy because they're saying it's aliens. But then, like, a layer lower in the disinformation, actually, it is. It's just the next layer. Actually, it is. And we spread this story of the technology because we have to keep you all from being scared to fly your very expensive killing machines, because aliens really are out there doing these
Do you
things.
think aliens have gremlins? Like, you think that's why their spaceships end up
Yeah.
crashing so much? On
That's why
planet
they're
Earth?
here. It's like, yeah.
They're like ripping apart oh, my flying saucer! Oh no!
And you know, the thing is that the problem with the disinformation explanation is you just never know how deep the disinformation goes. Like, how did you reach the conclusion that it was the deep state and that wasn't just an explanation for something much more problematic?
It's turtles all the way up. So how do we want to go about with this? So we should talk about like gremlin, like traditional, either unseen or little mischievous creatures inside the plane, ripping the hell out of it, or is it like, should we talk about like you're on a plane and you think you see something, like how scary is that? Yeah, I'll start it out. Let's see. So yeah, I was on a plane, saw a little thing, and even if we got some turbulence or something, whatever it was, like just not, it didn't crash the plane. Yeah, I'd still be pretty scared of that. I think like, I mean, planes are, even to this day, yes, we have a lot of, I would say like, obviously, yes, planes crash less frequently than cars, right? Like, I mean, like, it's like you're much more likely to get into a car accident than, an accident in an airplane. But when planes do crash, they really crash. It's like they don't just like fender bender, And recently, there's been some serious, like I mean, like the fact of like the neighborhood not too far from where we grew up had an airplane crash into it. It's like there's things of like all kinds of
They thought
planes
it could
falling out of the
stop
sky.
us.
Yeah,
We're not there
all
anymore.
kinds of stuff. Like, I mean, like just like recently, there's been a slew of like pretty high profile airplane crashes, and like yes, it's like, again, if you look like draw out the large statistic, it's like, but it's still scary. I think that's why I think we focus on it still too. If like we don't cover every car accident where someone is hurt in a serious way, but we do cover airplane crashes when people are like when airplanes fall out of the sky for some reason, because it's scary, and it is. And the technology still is kind of scary. We put a lot of trust in it, that it's going to work. So if I saw like a gremlin, I'd be freaked out. So I'm going to give gremlins I'm going to give them a good 4. I think because of the relation to something that's just inherently scary and dangerous, and the possible, if I saw something or a little guy I'd be like, oh great, this is this is going to hell. Or if I was about to get on a plane and I saw a little thing get on a plane, I probably would rethink getting on that plane. Like if you were like getting on the plane, you saw like little guys like coming up the luggage thing and get into the plane, would you like be like, I think I'm gonna change this flight? Like,
I'm going to take it a step further. Would you tell other people?
I might. Yeah, it's like, I don't know. That would be like, probably have to try to tell someone. They would probably think you're crazy and not listen to you. You probably end up in like a TSA thing getting interviewed about like, why are you telling people this thing? So yeah, that would definitely would put you in a bad position.
I mean, that part's kind of scary.
That's scary as well. Yeah, I mean,
That takes it up to a 5.
yeah, that is. It's like that's pretty conundrum, because like, yeah, if you actually saw something out there getting onto the plane, and what if you didn't tell someone the plane crashed?
Well,
And what
then
if
it's
you
too
did?
late anyway.
But then if you did tell someone the plane crashed, they might also blame on you.
But it'd be too late for them to get word back to anyone who knew.
Gremlins are scary. Like in that case, I'm like, yeah, definitely put them in a solid 4 category.
Yeah, it's a little bit like seeing the Flying Dutchman.
Yeah.
It's like, apparently you die when you see it, but how do we know that? Yeah, and so yeah, I guess like since not all gremlin sightings wound up being game terminating, then we know about them. So yeah, so gremlins, do I find them scary? Okay, so if I were on a plane and saw a gremlin on the wing, or what I identified as a gremlin on the wing, yeah, I'd probably be I'd be pretty freaked out by that. And I even welcome that stuff, just not in times when it could possibly kill me. Um,
And everyone else
and
too.
everyone else, but
Yeah.
I'd be more concerned about myself and whoever I'm there with. But yeah, not that I don't care about my fellow people, but you know that would be my immediate concern. Best strategy at that point is actually to make an offer to the gremlin, whatever you have on you, and tell it that there's plenty more when you get to wherever you're going. You have a credit card? Make good on that offer, because I imagine you probably have to fly back, and they know
Get
each
some of
other.
those extra little plain drink bottles, you know.
Like, I'll get you the real size, the real size. Yeah, none of these plain size things. Yeah, so yeah, hard to deny it. That would be that'd be a solid 4. It goes to a 5 if I have to be in government custody when I get back,
Try to
being
explain
questioned by
gremlins.
anything related to DHS. I don't think it's my likelihood of encountering one soon probably isn't that high, since as I mentioned I don't really fly. Also, we might not be able to fly soon. You might not be welcome anywhere else. Again,
Especially after
consulting.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all I got. That's all I got. I'm
when it
going to
comes
give
to-
it 4 monsters. Goes to 5 once you involve the government.
When it comes to people in general, I don't have a whole lot of faith in them. I think a lot of times people like to take shortcuts, which is not a reflection on me and my personality and my work ethic. Just in general, people like to take shortcuts. And when it comes to anything like of a giant scale like that, where I'm putting, if something could go wrong, could be catastrophic, I tend to be a little scared of that. You know, we talked about ships before, the idea of just being on a ship, not a fan of that. Plane's the same thing. I've never liked flying, and I don't know if it goes back to the Twilight Zone, watching the gremlin on the plane when I was a kid. Was I too young to see that, and it just kind of stuck with me my entire life? I don't know. But the idea of flying, like to this day, I don't like it at all. Given the opportunity, I'd rather drive than fly. So I'm gonna, and the idea of seeing a gremlin on the plane, just that's gonna put it over the top. So I'm gonna say for me, I'm gonna say it's more like a 4.5 for me. That's just seeing a gremlin.
It's unusually high rating for you.
I know. So I'm detecting a trend here. I have to be in like a situation where like catastrophic failure could be demise, you know, and that usually puts me up pretty high when I can't do anything about it. Yeah, I don't know what I would do if I saw it, because I feel like it's a very big moral dilemma. You know, do you say something or do you not? If you say something, you could be, it's like the trolley experiment. You know, if you say something, you could be saving a bunch of people, but at the detriment of yourself. And if you don't say anything, you're fine, possibly, but like everyone else could be in a bit of a pickle. So yeah, that's a tough one. But for me,
Yeah.
4.5 definitely. Don't like the idea of gremlins, and I definitely need to research on what offering I need to make to keep them happy for the next time I fly.
Well, I think like if you're a materialist person, okay, so you believe we're bodies, everything's scientifically acceptable, everything is scientifically provable, that's real, you know, and if it's not, all this stuff. And you look out and you see a gremlin, and you are convinced that it's a gremlin. Let's take it further. You like in the I think this happened in the William Shatner one. I remember better the one with the in the Twilight Zone, the movie, but it's the same sketch.
Was that
you know?
John Lithgow in the
I
Twilight Zone the movie?
think so. I think so. And so they get to the end of the thing and they get outside the plane and there's a bunch of damage to the plane. And it turns out there probably was a gremlin. Okay, so let's say you get to the end. You saw a gremlin, you get to the end, there's damage to the plane. It like seems like maybe it was a gremlin. But you're like a person that's always been, nah, like consciousness is the epiphenomena of processes in the brain. All we are meat suits with these brains. That consciousness is just the brain. You know. Now all of a sudden you see this supernatural creature. What does that do to your world? Like your entire world
You probably fly less,
just got a
you
lot.
know?
Well, yeah, but your entire world just got scarier because if gremlins are real, what does that mean about everything? You know, like if you saw the Loch Ness monster or one experience that is like undeniable to you that lets you know that this world is weird, what does that do to all your other little parameters you've built around things that keeps you feeling safe? What do you do with your philosophical city wall that walled you off from the forest and all the things that lived in it? What's
Well, I mean,
now?
I guess,
That
I
wasn't
guess if
so
you're the
good
type
anymore.
of, I guess if you're like the type of materialist thinker that doesn't really believe in certainty, I guess doesn't kind of doesn't matter because nothing was quite certain to
No, they
begin with.
hallucinate certainty though. Actually, they're weird.
You know, it's like I mean, you know, I think I would probably fall closer to a material somewhat, and at times, you know, but I don't really believe in certainty as such. You know,
But you'll close the closet door.
yes, yeah, I will. Well, that's what I mean. I said at times. I didn't
Well,
say-
yeah.
I think, you know, it's
Yeah, I
still
think
there are things that are scary, and you know, and
Yeah.
that's you know, it's
yeah, I think yeah, I think this is like a
things
really
that go bump in the night.
is a really fun and weird one. And like when it comes to like
Yeah, I kind of find it more scary than I thought I would as I go into it because it is kind of one of those phenomenons that are like, yeah, it's just more like it's weird enough. And I mean, technology going wrong can have broad implications, but like plain technology going wrong has really bad implications. And yeah, and it's like that's a
Yeah.
weird kind of.
so there's this thing. I usually don't jump into the theory after we've already done our monsters or
Yeah.
whatever, you know. But whatever, we can
The
either
wrap
include this or
up.
throw it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got this idea when it comes to technology and being in these areas where your survival is dependent on the technology. Or we'll just leave it at that. How desperate is the human attempt to grasp this technology that's just at the edge of one's ability to conceive because it's never existed before, these planes and things like that. In an effort to get that, to learn it, to integrate it, do we reach out with our what I'll call psi capacities, you know, our what I call psychic powers, things that are beyond our normal functioning, in order to attempt to do it? You know, we're really pulling out all the stops. In that attempt, do we create some kind of a disturbance in what I'll just call like the psychic field that stirs up the other things that are in the psychic field? Because like whether it's like, and again, like when you have these technologies that are emerging, you know, do we stir up things in the psychic field? You know, racing for market share on AI. You know, I mean, that's survival to a lot of those clowns. You know, so. You know, I mean, do we?
Or
stir
next
up
time you're gonna
entities?
get on a plane, take those like little Prussian mushrooms, and that's